Today we're going through every type of racing, starting off with Formula 1. Formula 1 is one of the most famous and arguably the hardest of all the racing types out there. It is the one place where most racing drivers are actually trying to end up, and it's also overall the entirety of the fastest racing category, especially with the development of downforce technologies that take some real fast corners. While drag racing and IndyCar do reach higher top speeds, they don't tend to take corners like F1 cars do, nor do they drag the G-forces that an F1 driver has to undergo. This makes F1 an extremely difficult sport to take up, as they take around 7G throughout the entire race, which is actually not that much further away from an actual fighter jet. Now, Formula 1 is considered the pinnacle of motorsport for two big reasons. One, the sport is at the forefront of technological advancements, and these cars have been extremely safe in recent years, unlike some other racing categories we're going to talk about in this video. But this does come with some extremely high costs, which makes F1 one of the most expensive sports out there. And if you were to ride off an F1 car, it could go for millions of dollars in costs. The second reason why F1 is considered the pinnacle of motorsport has everything to do with the overall category that it belongs to. F1 drivers compete at the highest performing level of open wheel racing, which, as the name suggests, is racing with exposed wheels. Anything from karting to IndyCar, all the way to the Formula 1 classes, are all considered open wheel racing types. Now, these are religiously known for their extreme lightweight and are very prone to crashing. One tap on one of your exposed wheels could end your race in a matter of seconds, which we see time and time again in Formula 1. In a season, 20 drivers and 10 teams set out to win the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors' Championship, where we go racing almost every single place on Earth. And while Formula 1 started out as a European/British sport, in recent years it's become a global phenomenon with races in the Middle East, Asia, Oceania, and the Americas, just to name the least. And all we need now is the Alaskan Grand Prix. To win an F1 race, drivers need a very mixed skill set. They need to be able to provide their team with useful feedback and data during practice runs, which can be a problem for rookie drivers or Lance Stroll. But they also need to be able to set high-speed laps in qualifying, which, in the wise words of William Buxton, it basically determines the starting position for the end of the race. During the race, drivers need to balance the strategy, team communication, battery levels, and general on-track perception, while going at insane speeds of around 360 kilometers per hour, which is around 223 freedom units per hour, by the way. But now, speaking of freedom units, before this, I briefly mentioned IndyCar as an important category of open wheel racing, which is basically an Americanized version of F1 that really likes oval tracks for some reason. Now, not all tracks are in the Indy 500 though. Some are just regular circuits or street circuits. IndyCar, officially known as the IndyCar Series, is the highest tier of open wheel racing in America specifically. This kind excludes F1, of course, but that doesn't really count since it's more considered a global sport these days. The championship in IndyCar works a little bit differently though. The premise is what you would expect. The drivers get points based on finishing positions, but they can also get bonus points for leading laps and leading the most laps, which makes sense considering the distance of IndyCar's races for far longer than F1 races, which is the longest one being the famous Indy 500, which is 410 miles longer than the average F1 Grand Prix. If we're talking the difference between these two, let's also compare the cars themselves. In IndyCar, everyone runs the same standard issue chassis and can choose between a Honda and a Chevrolet engine, so the playing field, unlike F1, is definitely more leveled. And what makes IndyCar nice to look at is, apart from the super sick car designs, it's also the variety of different tracks that the drivers race at. Speedways, circuits, street circuits, and the drivers have to adapt to these situations accordingly. It's slightly more forgiving than F1 in some scenarios, with some of the broader circuits for example, but not the high speedways because they can reach above 380 kilometers per hour, which is around 240 miles an hour. Crashes at these speeds are unforgiving because the oval shape and banking of the corners makes it very easy for these cars to crash course into other drivers, but just a slight love tap with the wall is also extremely unforgiving. Now, you've heard me mention it before, but the Indy 500 is the beating heart and ultimate spectacle of this racing class. Winning the Indy 500 is also part of the Triple Crown of motorsport, where drivers have to win the Monaco F1 Grand Prix, the Indy 500, and the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which is a feat only Graham Hill has ever managed to complete. The Indy 500 holds a special place in history as it's one of the oldest and largest single-day sporting events in the world. So it's clear now, in case of open wheel racing, F1 and IndyCar are both very prestigious, but there's more. To get these classes in the first place, there's also lower categories, lower speeds, lower budgets, lower downforce, but still enough chances for potential candidates to present themselves. Let's talk about the traditional route most drivers take to get their F1 license, or what we call it, the super license. Usually, it all starts in karting. Before all the F1 fame, almost every every racing driver was just this tiny 6-year-old kid in an oversized helmet, getting whiplash at 80 kilometers an hour in a glorified shopping trolley. It's where the foundation of racers' careers is usually made. It's technically open wheel racing since the tires stick out, and despite them being an FIA regulated karting championship, karting is usually regional and works on a single competition level where drivers just enroll for multiple races, or sometimes just singular events. After karting, the driver finally hits puberty, and hopefully they'll have enough races to graduate to F4, the first real and official step into single-seater racing. Formula 4 is designed to teach young drivers how to function like professionals, and things start to feel serious, but they're still generally at a low threshold. Drivers are around 15, and the cars are low power and very standardized to give drivers a chance to show off their skills in equal machinery, or crash them. There are multiple F4 championships worldwide. We have the British, Italian, Spanish, and each one acts like a regional Hunger Games for future F1 prodigies. Now, your pattern recognition monkey brain would expect Formula 3 to be the next logical step, and you're almost right. Sure, it exists, but there's another intermediate class between the two called Formula Regional. It's not as fast as Formula 3, but it does offer a significant performance jump from F4. These cars get more downforce, which means a serious jump in corner speed, but also way more opportunities to screw up. There are other versions of Formula Regional Americas, Japan, and so on, all with the same mission to separate the actual talents from those who peaked in karting and are simply just going on a trust fund. Unless you're Lance Stroll, or Mazepin, or Latifi. Actually, I'm just gonna stop there. If you did okay in Formula Regional, you're most likely going to be welcomed into Formula 2 or Formula 3. This is where things start to actually get serious, because mainly you're driving alongside the F1 Grand Prix. You're basically part of the same weekend program and share the paddock, so you never know who's actually watching. These guys also race at a pretty damn hard rate, because they're all desperately wanting to prove themselves. For anyone bored or disappointed with the F1 Grand Prix, look up an F3 race, and they are usually super entertaining to actually watch. And unlike Formula 1, which is a true constructors championship, F2 and F3 all use the same chassis and specs, making for an even playing field and way more interesting races. These racing classes are the true gateway drug into F1 and serve as sort of a breeding ground for talent. But the cars they actually drive are also a genuine step up from the junior classes. Although the F3 are arguably simpler, the F2 cars actually at least come pretty damn close to the F1 cars and are pretty damn complicated in their own right. In this phase of the driver's career, they'll learn to master the dark art of tire management, something that a Ferrari, even in F1, can't manage to do. But not only this, but they're learning how to qualify under pressure and how to not crash consistently, like Lance Stroll, which is why Lance Stroll skipped F2. The class makes or breaks drivers, along with the psychological warfare of knowing Toto Wolff might be watching, and every 10th of a second counts here. Okay, so that's the usual route drivers take. Sometimes categories are skipped here and there. For example, Max Verstappen started in karting, then jumped straight into F3, did a few regional tournaments, and then already moved into F1. So there are a lot of options available. But there's also odd formula categories which don't fit into the hierarchy which we discussed earlier. Formula E is one of these categories, and its current driver lineup has a couple of familiar names if you're an F1 fan. We have Sebastian Buemi, Nick De Vries, Stoffel van der Born, just to name a few. And although these guys essentially drive angry sounding hair dryers, the class has grown into one of the most legit global championships in formula racing. And although it technically counts as open wheel racing, these things are shaped like racing cars that you would control with one of those steering wheels thingies. So it's low-key more shaped like an Indy car. So imagine F1, but swap the roaring V6 engine of coked up RC cars and a bunch of street circuits, because that is one cool aspect of this class. They actually run a bunch of unseen street circuits that are temporarily built specifically for the race. They hit a bunch of cities like Berlin, Tokyo, London, Madrid. So if you're a fan of racing like this category is definitely one for you. The idea was born in 2014 as a futuristic experiment, but has now rooted itself as a legitimate racing category. The cars themselves are electric monsters with over 470 horsepower, capable of hitting 200 miles an hour while somehow being lighter than most open wheel cars. The real challenge is in the sport's energy management. Drivers have to balance outright pace with conservative battery power, which basically turns every race into a high-speed chess match. And because of regenerative braking, where energy is recovered during deceleration, the driving style is completely alien in comparison to Formula 1 or 2. Lifting and coasting is somehow more important here than the average Ferrari strategy.
sake, we are doing 200 meters like rivals all the time.
Formula E is also somewhat unpredictable. Although teams are allowed to develop a lot of their own components in this category, it makes for significant performance gaps. The narrow and unforgiving street circuits still factor in a lot of unpredictability, and again, if you're a Formula 1 fan, give this one a chance. It's genuinely impressive. But a racing class you unfortunately can't watch anymore is Formula W. And I say unfortunately because it was very entertaining to say the least. Formula W is an all-female class of racing that was discontinued after COVID due to the insignificant funding. For a while, racing advocates called for an all-female category because they felt women were underrepresented in motorsports, so then the mission was simple: find these underrepresented talents and give them a fair chance to prove themselves. But unfortunately, things didn't go exactly how they should have went. The most notorious example being in Spa, which was luckily not fatal, but it was very funny to watch everyone spin out on the exact same corner. I don't know how they done it. Besides that though, the cars were also significantly underdeveloped and it was just kind of terrible. They went only about 150 miles per hour max and they had the traction of a wet noodle. It's kind of like walking into a shooting range asking, hey, why aren't there any women here? And then sending a group of women in with Nerf guns. It is just unfair. Despite all the unfair chances these women get, the sport did create some household names like Jamie Chadwick, who actually won all 3 of the driver seasons. But a lot of fans rightfully pointed out that if a category was made to elevate women into a higher racing class, then clearly there's something wrong that the fact they're only trapped into one category. And although Jamie Chadwick became a serious inspiration for women in open wheel racing, the W Series did not last and didn't exceed in its mission to bridge the gap. Instead, it kind of created this weird isolated bubble. To combat this setback, F1 Academy was created recently, which is an all-female development program, and unlike the W Series, the F1 Academy actually uses F4 cars, putting young female drivers in on par with young male drivers, which, if you think about it, was the way they probably should have done it since the very beginning. That's enough of using the formula word because I'm sick of saying it. But I think Max Verstappen kind of had the same issue. So a little while ago, he decided to go on a side quest to get his GT3 license. And this gives the racing class a lot of fresh popularity. But what even is GT3? At its core, GT3 racing is all about production-based supercars. What this means is that the cars are public road-approved vehicles that are rebuilt for the purpose of actual racing. You'll see versions of the iconic Porsche 911, Ferrari 296, and a Mercedes AMG, and all of these still look like the cars you'd see in a luxury dealership, just with a lot more sponsors slapped on it. And of course, they are heavily modified, but they're not completely redesigned. The identity of this sport is to truly remain a visual link to their public road origins. But because these cars are so wildly different, think in engine, balance, tire wear, and they're literally anything that makes anyone prefer one car over the other, there's a system called balance of performance that steps in to stop a total performance gap. Racing socialism, if you will. The officials tweak engine power, car weight, and aerodynamics to make sure every car on track can lap the track at a roughly the same pace.
But before we continue, if there's one thing I love more than cars going in circles, it's destroying families in War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made that's now free on PC, consoles, mobile devices, and also Korea. When playing War Thunder, you will be able to play as one of over 2,500 different vehicles. You can play as pretty much anything. You can play as an F-16, a freaking biplane, a battleship, a fanboy car. The choice is pretty much yours. Not only that, but you can join over 70 million players in sick battles. Do you like missiles? Do you like tanks? Do you like leaking government documents in forum posts? The War Thunder is the game for you. These guys have potentially the best damage system in all of gaming. And no, I'm not just saying that because they're paying me to, mostly. They don't have simple hitboxes that subtract damage when you're hit. They calculate exactly where you were penetrated with X-ray view. You can see precisely where the shell penetrated you. Alongside, they show which parts of the car were actually affected. Also, when you sign up using my links down below, you will get access to free regional bonus packs. And if you're from the US, then all you gotta do is open the pack and congrats, you will have a free US themed tank. And even if you haven't played in 6 months, you'll also get it. But please, just come back. It's like my mom all over again. Click the link in the description and pin comment to get the game with my link and join a worldwide community of over 95 million players in epic PvP battles today and delve into breathtaking experiences that is War Thunder. With an unmatched wealth of high quality content to discuss discovered there's simply no better game for fans of military history. So thank you again, War Thunder, for sponsoring. You'll notice that I'm in Vegas right now thanks to them. But anyways, cars, they go in circles. So you didn't know that.
What makes GT3 really awesome is how accessible it actually is. The cars have driver aids like ABS and traction control, meaning they aren't just for superhuman athletes, and the category hosts a variety of amateur and pros. So your middle-aged car fanatic dentist might share the track with the previous Le Mans champion. This accessibility makes it so that GT3 is also considered the biggest racing class in the world, with around 4,000 enrolled participants globally, who of course never participate all at the same time, because in turn, a GT3 race can have a lot of participants. Think somewhere between 50 and 75 cars, and the race itself can have super hectic or entertaining weeks. We see a similar thing in the junior formula classes, where the moment the playing field is elevated, it makes for some really entertaining racing. And now you're probably thinking, sketchy, surely that GT2 and GT1 exist if GT3 does. Well, kinda. They don't exist anymore, though GT3 has become the global standard for touring car races. GT2 and GT1 are more historic races classes, and GT1 cars specifically, which existed in the 90s, were essentially coked up near prototypes that required only very few matching specs to have road legal variants. For modern GT3 fans, these cars look completely alien. They had a lot of horsepower, significant engineering freedom, and massive downforce. These cars looked so good, but unfortunately, it wouldn't be long-lived. Costs spiraled like crazy due to what was basically an arms race to make the most messed-up driving machine possible, and as soon as one constructor achieved total dominance, specifically Mercedes, who were so fast that they actually took off, the remaining competitors decided that they wanted to pull out. They saw no path to victory, and no competition means no race. And although the racing classes only really died out in 2012, it wasn't really that interesting anymore. And with regulation changes, most GT cars were getting closer and closer to GT3 cars anyway. So while GT1 cars were basically prototype missiles pretending to be road cars, GT2s actually were product-based machines. Like the modern-day GT3 cars, the GT2s stepped up after GT1 was disbanded and continued under name of GTE. Soon this classification of car became the top class in endurance racing, but of course we can't have nice things forever. And GTE slowly died to fully replace all cars in endurance racing. Now, endurance racing is also commonly named the WEC, or the World Endurance Championship, and it's an extremely popular branch of racing. These endurance races, whose goal are to test the durability and equipment of the drivers, particularly use GT2 and GT3 vehicles, and the goal is to cover the greatest distance across the track in the distance span of 4, 6, 8, 12, or even 24 hours. And it is a completely different version of format in comparison to actual races, where it doesn't matter who crosses the finish line first, but instead it's more of an endurance race. But it isn't any less of a mental test. This class of racing also hosts some of the most iconic events like the 24 hours at Le Mans, Spa, and even Daytona. What's interesting about these endurance races is that besides GT cars, they can also run prototypes of hypercars and LMP2s. They use several different car classes to determine winners for each category, but they still share the track, making an interesting performance gap, and this also means that the races have multiple winners. The racing times are, of course, so long it's impossible for a single driver to complete it, so the teams have to manage how long their drivers' stints are. Switchovers have to be as quick as possible too, and now besides being used in GT races and sometimes endurance racing, GT2 cars have also been resurrected in modern iterations. This modern one is not related to the old version at all. These new cars host over 700 horsepower but have less downforce than the GT3s. So these cars have faster straight line speed but are easier to handle in corners. They're designed for gentleman drivers, which is a polite term for rich white dudes who can't drive but are still car fanatics. But another famous competition that uses GT3 cars these days are the DTM, the biggest racing class from Germany. It used to use Class 1 touring cars, which were prototype cars endorsed by the FIA, but the DTM has been around since the 80s, before being revived in the 2000s into the form we know nowadays. The point system is very similar to F1, with one key difference being the format of the racing weekend. DTM often hosts 2 sprint races around 55 laps with 1 mandatory pit stop. So since 2021, DTM's gone full GT3. These cars are lighter, faster, and tuned for more maximum sprint carnage. And to keep things fair, DTM also uses balance of performance rules. It's basically the best of both of the GT world and the F1 world. The result is close, unpredictable racing where nothing is entirely certain. It's also a racing class in which you see some good action on the Hockenheim Ring, a track that is currently not technically in the F1 calendar but absolutely should be. One tier below in horsepower, you'll find touring car racing. It's significantly less popular, but still very fun to watch, as instead of the fancy high-performance supercars, touring car racing can be done in a Honda Civic with a roll cage. No, literally, they dead-ass just drive in mass-produced sedans or hatchbacks, with some sponsors even just throwing the logos on the side. These cars also have a mandate to front-wheel drive, like most commercial cars do, unlike the big boys in GT racing. And suddenly, we're finally returning to the United States. We know they love to put IndyCar on oval tracks, but there's another kind of racing, NASCAR. Now, I was today years old when I figured out that this is an actual abbreviation and doesn't just mean NASCAR, like car at the end, because apparently it stands for the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing, and that's gotta be one of the coolest things ever. Around 36 cars start doing a rolling start on what is mostly an oval track and battle it out in a super interesting racing format. First, a single normal race is divided into 3 stages, with points handed out mid-race to keep aggression levels comfortably homicidal. At 3 different moments in the race, each on a third of the racing distance, points are given out to the top 10 cars at that time, making it so that everyone that is sprinting to the front like crazy all the time are truly spectacular. And similar to IndyCar, the oval tracks are especially unforgiving when it comes to crashing. All it takes is one love tap to the wall and you could end up in a frenzied crash. So how does NASCAR keep this format interesting? Well, besides normal points rewarding at each third of the race, drivers can, across the season, accumulate playoff points. The playoffs, taking place at the end of the season, specifically in the last 10 rounds, are elimination races in which the championship is basically decided. Any driver who wins a NASCAR race is guaranteed a spot in the playoffs. If the limit of 16 cars is not filled, then the rest of the spots are filled by those who have the most points. This crazy and somewhat complicated format gives a crazy moment just like this one. Ross Chastain was too far behind to make it to the final 4, the last round of the NASCAR playoffs, so as a last-ditch effort to still compete, he took notes from a video game and drove straight across the curved wall, making up enough positions to secure his spot, which is just absolutely nuts. However, this playoff format has fans divided, because as thrilling as it is to create these moments like Chastain's overtake, one bad playoff severely punishes drivers who have had a consistent race finish across the season. And we already know that one single tap, even if it's not your fault, can end your race. But with the exception of the final race being the decisive round, it looks like NASCAR is not going to be bringing any major changes to the sport anytime soon. NASCAR itself is a sport with an interesting history. The sole reason it exists was due to prohibition, an alcohol ban in the United States that lasted from 1920 to around 1933. Due to the rampant production of illegal moonshine, people needed vehicles that could pass as stock cars, as if they just freshly rolled out of the factory, but were actually heavily modified under the car's hood. With an upgraded suspension for heavy loads of alcohol and tuned engines for maximum speed, people soon started noticing the racing potential of these vehicles. Informal races quickly erupted around the Daytona area, and just after the Second World War, the racing community, under influence of Bill Frayne Sr., came together to unify these rules. In 1948, the NASCAR group was formed, and a year later, they held their first official race. Instead of bottling whiskey, they would soon be bottling adrenaline as the speeds increased over the years. It's a beautiful piece of American race culture, which has resulted in an extremely entertaining racing class. But a different category that is just as entertaining is rally racing. Rally racing is like none of the other categories we've talked about so far. In rally racing, drivers don't race each other directly on circuits, but instead, they raced around the clock on closed public roads, often through forests, mountains, deserts, and icy hellscapes. Hellscapes that look like nature itself are actively working against these cars. Unlike most forms of racing, rally isn't a one-man show either. Each car has a driver and a navigator. The co-driver's job is to ready a terrifyingly fast list of instructions called pace notes, describing every corner, jump, and death trap ahead, which the navigator has to somehow read aloud for the driver to be able to know.
Sammy, you are wrecking the car!
Rally cars themselves are based on production models, except they got a bit of a tuned-up engine and a rolling cage to withstand heavy crashes. Modern rally races run turbocharged engines with hybrid power and all-wheel drive systems that let them glide over all sorts of roads, or no roads at all. Each rally event is set in a completely different environment. Just compare the Acropolis rally in Greece, which hosts its races in a dusty mountain environment, in comparison to the Sweden Rally. Rallying is super unforgiving as well, and the World Rally Championship is considered one of the most hardcore tests of a driver's skill and nerve, because rallying is not just a car go fast boom, because you're managing high-speed corners, verbal commands, and the grip with the added nerve of wanting to set the fastest time. And the results are absolutely claustrophobic. And not only that, but watching them is extremely nauseating. So besides the obvious madness, what do you need to actually win the WRC? Well, the WRC isn't just about being the fastest driver. It's about surviving the elements and staying consistently in the points to make sure you accumulate the most. You don't want to fold around because you've pushed yourself too much. It's all about consistency. The WRC spans multiple seasons across multiple rallies in different countries and different roads, and it's arguably the most diverse racing class out there, as it also hosts races, for example, in Africa, a continent widely avoided by most global racing classes. But for rallying, the Sahara Desert and the Chalabi Desert in Kenya are perfect for racing. So whoever completes all the stages in the shortest total time without crashing, breaking the car, or even earning time penalties wins that rally. The driver with the most points after all of the rallies in the world is the world champion. Each rally weekend offers up to 35 points for one crew, spread across 3 different categories, and yes, that means if you're having a terrible weekend, you could still salvage something by going full send on Sunday. The first category is the Rally Final classification, awarded based on your total time across every stage. But you only get these points if you actually finish the rally. You can be leading by minutes, but if your car breaks down in category 2 or 3 and you've binned it, congrats, you've just wasted 3 days for nothing in return. Super Sunday is where WRC drivers go full goblin mode, where 5 teams can be awarded points for their overall performance over all of the stages. So a lot of points can be made up if you need to get them, even if you've crashed earlier or if you're even overall out of contention. This is the time to earn bonus points. It's essentially designed to make the sport fairer because crashing your car or breaking down is not uncommon in rally racing. Every rally ends with one final stage called the Power Stage, which is often broadcasted live, where it's shorter, faster, and uses a different timing system entirely. You see, normal rallying uses timers with just the tenths of the seconds, but the Power Stages use thousands like in Formula 1, meaning that we could allow for tighter results. The top 5 fastest drivers on the single stage get extra points. So winning all of this comes down to consistency across all of these things. It's not about being reckless, but being methodical about your driving. If you think you're gonna lose grip on that one corner, it's better to take it slower because otherwise you'll lose out on the final classification points. So we know the 2-person death pact between driver and navigator is crucial here. They need to have nerves of steel and really good communication, something that your divorced parents could take notes from. And while sometimes these two will already have a hard-ass time navigating the road just as is, there's another factor that makes the sport even crazier: the fans. Rallying is an extreme viewing sport, meaning it's thrilling to look at, but really dangerous. Die-hard rally fans are a special breed. They are essentially adrenaline junkies who will hike for miles, camp in freezing rain, and even stand inches from the track just to see. The remote tracks are not that bad, with just a few outliers and idiots with a death wish. But it's around the finish line or around more popular tracks where it gets a little crazy, often taking it even too far, you could say. The human tunnel concept is pretty nuts, where cars would literally drive through only for fans to jump back at the last second, and the Group B era of the 1980s made this even more dangerous as the cars were tuned up to about 250 horsepower, and in combining that with uncontrollable crowds leads to several fatal crashes, including the infamous 1986 rally in Portugal disaster, which led to a total ban of Group B. These days, accidents are luckily rarer due to safety measures. The WRC enforces strict safety zones, marshals, and cars called zero cars that clear the route and lead the way on each stage, sort of similar to the Formula 1 safety car. And these days, rally fans are mostly known as daredevils, but with a good heart, as sometimes if drivers get stuck after a crash or simply after driving through snow or mud, the race turns into a group project and spectators will somehow help them out. But something that's not as safe is drag, and no, not the James Charles kind. Drag racing is what happens when you take all the subtlety from motorsport, you know, the art of taking corners or a fine-tuned racing strategy, and just light it on fire and throw it in a dumpster. This racing category is ridiculous in all of the best ways possible, and I'm seeing a trend here. Drag racing pits 2 cars against each other on a drag strip, which is just a glorified stretch of tarmac with enough rubber laid down to resurface a small country. On that strip, 2 cars line up on the starting line, and their goal is to just floor it. And these cars go so bloody fast. They need parachutes to slow down these cars, they go that quick. You're measured on elapsed time, aka your time from start to end, and also your reaction time. And you'd think that since you're going on a straight line, nothing can go wrong, but I can assure you, it does. With some of these cars, even essentially being built like airplanes, and one is bound to take off. Drag racing didn't start in fancy arenas with sponsorship plastered cars. Its origins actually lie with bored mechanics and outlaws in 1940s California, who thought stop signs were pretty much a suggestion. After World War II, a wave of returning soldiers came home with not just PTSD, but also a bunch of newfound engineering skills. So naturally, with a country having no global conflicts, these men got bored and a lot of them started hot rodding, stripping down old cars, cranking up the engines, and racing each other anywhere that was flat enough to see whose project was quicker. Hot rodding has been around since cars became available to the general public, but it was in this post-World War II era where it actually took off. NASCAR, which we discussed earlier, was emerging around the same time period. So you can see this time period was pretty lucrative for motor racing. And not only this, but a bunch of godforsaken stretches of nothing in California soon became the first unofficial drag strips. Guys would show up with cars that looked like they were built out of spare airplane crafts and call it engineering. In a similar fashion to NASCAR, a guy came around and legalized the scene of all these daredevil idiots, to say the least. And this time, the man was called Wally Parks. Yep, that's a real name. Who became the founder of the National Hot Rod Association, who ensured all racers were put onto actual tracks starting from the 1950s. These days, drag racing is also held in Europe through an official FIA European Championship. America has its own version, obviously run by the National Hot Rod Association, so the top competitions in the Mission Foods drag racing series has been hosted since 1965. And this series hosts 4 major categories. The first is for top fuel, which is absurd open-wheel rockets that are built solely for acceleration. These are the classic ones that come with coked-up V8 engines and look like driving airplanes. Records show top speeds exceeding 500 kilometers an hour, or in US birds, 310 miles an hour. These machines generate a lot of power at once and are at the top of the food chain when it comes to drag racing. But the second category down below is funny car. If top fuel dragsters are the long, elegant rockets of drag racing, funny cars are the feral siblings that got dropped on their head when they were younger. These beasts vaguely resemble actual cars, but only if you squint, because they still pack a punch of around 11,000 horsepower, and the engines sit in front of the driver, and they have to get in a little weird, because the entire car is lifted up from the drivers to get in. Besides that, they share the same supercharged V8s as top fuel, but with shorter wheelbases and less aerodynamic bodies, making them a tad bit slower. Then there is Pro Stock, the third and final conventional category, which is where drag racing goes to work and puts on a collared shirt. Pro Stock is supposed to represent actual cars, well, more or less, which is a massive joke because there's nothing stock about them unless your local dealership sells 1,300 horsepower V8 monsters. Unlike their nitro-snorting cousins, Pro Stock cars are naturally aspirated, which means they're not supercharges, not turbocharges, but just pure mechanical violence. They run on regular high-octane race gas, and they actually shift gears with a clutch. Now, if you have been listening closely, you heard that I mentioned there was 4 categories, and you're right, but the last one is about a vehicle we haven't even talked about before, the motorcycle, because 4 wheels wasn't enough. The NHRA's 2-wheel death machines are wise and highly modified purpose-built monsters, which stretched out with a wider frame, and also just enough bodywork to make sure the insurance company gets a little nervous. Obviously, if you crash here, it's gonna suck even more, and this proves the absolute nerves it takes to get in one of these. But it takes nerve in general to get on a motorcycle. You are much more exposed, and crashing is a lot scarier. This hasn't stopped people from racing them either. MotoGP is the highest class of motorcycle racing, comparable with F1 in that it hosts a global run of races in its championship and is at the skill ceiling of its respective vehicle. But where Formula 1 is about $1 million car and team principals throwing headsets, MotoGP is about strapping yourself to a missile with handlebars and praying your femurs survive the weekend. MotoGP are hand-built science experiments with race machines so illegal that if you tried to register one for the street, the DMV would detain you instantly. These 1000cc 4-stroke monsters weigh barely 157 kilos. Each factory gets a thin ration of engines per season, a 22-liter fuel tank, and one tire supplier, Michelin, because apparently we're all supposed to trust a French motherfucker who gives stars to restaurants. A normal racing weekend besides the main race features practice, qualifying, and sprint races sometimes. The sprint is half distance of the Sunday distance and awards fewer points. The car current grid has a more diverse political ecosystem than New York. Ducati are the Italian mob bosses of the grid, followed around by some others like Aprilia, Honda, and Yamaha. Yep, the one that also makes keyboards and boat engines for whatever reason. Each brand has a factory team and a few satellite teams using slightly nerfed bikes, and of course the riders, who are absolute psychos who make the circus work. Legends like Valentino Rossi, Marc Marquez, Agostini, the guy who won everything before traction control was even invented. And MotoGP started all the way back in 1949 as a 500cc class with a bunch of unhinged dudes wrestling two-stroke engines that screamed louder than your tinnitus. In 2002, it rebranded as MotoGP, ditched the two-strokes, and went up to 990cc engines because the world needed more torque. And if you can't get enough of MotoGP, then World SBK might be for you. Its key difference compared to MotoGP is that it uses production-based models, none of the prototype stuff. They're like the touring cars of motorcycle racing. World SBK machines are commonly known as superbikes, which are road-legal-ish production models with their soles replaced. They run 1000cc engines, which are the same displacement as MotoGP, but less prototype wizardry makes them a bit slower. Electronics are restricted, frames must stay true to the production model, and everything from engine tuning to aerodynamics has to stay within the rules so the bikes still resemble their street-legal cousins. And yes, Pirelli is the sole tire supplier again, because it wouldn't be fair if everyone wasn't dealing with the same tire degradation. And unlike MotoGP's one race per weekend, World SBK has 3 of them. You've got the Super Pole race, which is basically a sprint race on one day, and then the other 2 races on the following day. It's basically meat and potatoes. Now, if World SBK and MotoGP are too polished for you, you could also head to Motocross or Supercross, the rally version on 2 wheels. We're smashing these 2 together here because Supercross is essentially a variation that's held in stadiums or arenas. Back in the early 1900s, British farmers got bored and decided to start drag racing over cow fields. Over a century later, it evolved into a full-blown sport that takes natural obstacle courses, and they're quite long too, being around 30 minutes a race, so it's basically a cardio workout disguised as a death wish. Boat Series famously features whoops and a series of rhythmic tiny jumps that send your spine into orbit, which are commonly taken as single, double, or even triple jumps. And in contrast, Supercross tracks are short and tight tracks. Each event builds through the main race of 20 minutes. But before the riders even get that, they have to survive a series of other events. The day starts early when riders roll out to a timed qualifying, which only allows the top 40 fastest riders to make the cut. The surviving 40 are then split into 2 heat races, and this is where things actually get real. Basically 20 bikes trying to occupy the same space at the same time, and each heat only the top 9 automatic transfers to the main event. And if you're not part of that top 9, maybe the odds are in your favor, because now you're sent to the last chance qualifying, meant as a fair chance if a rider makes a mistake or crash during a heat race or had a mechanical failure, where LCQ is 5 minutes long and only the top 4 finishers move on to the main event, while everyone else is pretty much eliminated. All the surviving riders then make for a spectacular main event. But if even that is not exciting enough for you, I have one last option left for you. Esports, baby. From the danger of your own setup, you can now goon in the F1 Sim Pod. No, it's the Isle of Man TT, considered the most dangerous motorcycle race in existence. In the world even. It's an unforgivable course located in the British Crown Island. It features over 200 bends, has public roads lined with hazards like stone walls and buildings, and is about 60 kilometers or 37 miles long. It's an annual death wish disguised as a sporting event. You forget fancy racetracks and safety barriers and even runoff zones, or even the slightest chance of recovering when you fall. With average top speeds reaching around 290 kilometers an hour, which in American Hawks is about 136 miles an hour, and that is just the average. Imagine holding 135 miles an hour through villages. This all started in 1907 when Britain decided street racing was illegal, and the Isle of Man said, well, we're technically not Britain, so let's let them do it anyway. The name TT, Tourist Trophy, came when the idea of all of these racers were supposed to test touring motorcycles. You know, for tourists, because nothing says tourists like hitting a stop sign while going 100 miles an hour. It even used to be part of the MotoGP World Championship until 1976, when riders collectively decided that dying here wasn't worth it anymore. So MotoGP left, but the TT stayed, because this event doesn't need permission. It just needs volunteers with nerves of titanium and life insurance paperwork left unassigned. Unlike most two-wheeled races where riders actually battle wheel to wheel, the TT uses a time trial format similar to rallying. Riders set off one at a time to race the clock, and its highest class out of all of them is the Senior TT, boasting 6 laps that span 220 26 miles total. That's almost an hour and 40 minutes of nerve-wracking concentration. And yes, there's a sidecar race, meaning two people willingly sign up to share a motorcycle through the world's most dangerous track, and the other hangs off the side like they lost a bet. But let's be clear before we wrap things up. The Isle of Man TT is horrifically dangerous. It has claimed hundreds of lives since 1907, with riders, marshals, and even spectators. There's no sugarcoating here. It's like the K2 mountain of the racing world, or the deadliest drug of a tweaker community. Every rider who takes the start line knows exactly what they're signing up for, and yet they do it anyway, which is actually how you should feel when hitting my subscribe button. I'm so close to 30k. Not really, but please, I love you all for sticking around. So if you're part of the percentage of people that are not subscribed, please do. It would help me out immensely. Also, remember to click the link in the description to play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox using my link in the pinned comment or description. New peeps or peeps who haven't played for 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across PC and consoles, including multiple premium vehicles, in-game currency, and more. Available for a limited time only, so make sure not to miss it. And thank you for enabling these shitty videos to be made in the first place. But subscribe, and I love you all with the video on screen. Bye!